Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Creative Noahland podcast. We've got a great one today as I was lucky enough to sit down with Lachlan Monaghan, male principal lead dancer from the Birmingham Royal Ballet. We talk about Lachlan's journey and how at 16 he left Australia to come to London to study at the Royal Ballet School to become an elite level world-class dancer. Which is quite astounding really, now knowing that ballet wasn't even Lachlan's first love. Having been told that he would never reach the level of principal dancer, Lachlan's story is one of resilience, bravery, passion and determination. We talk about the most exhilarating performance of Lachlan's career, Black Sabbath the ballet. Stepping out of his comfort zone and not only dancing, but also singing a solo in front of a sellout crowd that included Sharon Osbourne and Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath. This gave Lachlan the chance to showcase one of his other passions, singing. We joke in the podcast about Lachlan being some sort of creative polymath or Renaissance man, but he really is, somehow finding the time and focus to not only dance professionally at a world-class level, but he sings, he plays the piano, he's performed one-man shows back in Sydney, he's a choreographer, he teaches, but he also takes the most beautiful photographs, capturing the unseen, more intimate, behind-the-scenes moments of the ballet world, which I'm desperately trying to bully him into turning into a book. I'm so grateful to Lachlan for taking the time out of his literally crazy schedule to sit down and chat to us. There's so much good stuff in this one about self-belief, the importance of being versatile and never being afraid to try new things. Anyway, enough from me. Let's get into it. Dude, thank you for doing the Creative Noahland podcast.
Absolute pleasure. I'm glad we finally found a little bit of time to
be fair, it has been a year in the making, but I'm glad I've managed to get you on your busy schedule and talk to you about yourself, your career. I'm going to go straight into it. Was dance your first artistic passion as a kid?
No, not really. I guess it was the first artistic passion I pursued that developed into some sort of career or had the potential to. The first one that sort of grabbed me in that way made me consider the future. But I was always quite a creative kid. I was always writing a lot, always writing novels, and even as a sort of 7-8-year-old, printing my own books and putting barcodes on the back off Google and, nonsense things. But I was always creative, always in my head, always a bit of a daydreamer. Loved music, always really loved music, was surrounded by music from a very early age. And always sort of doing something like throwing photo slideshows together of the family and always the kid on holiday with a camera in hand. So I was always doing something creative. I guess at that stage, I didn't define what it was. I was just always interested in those sorts of things.
And where does that stem from, do you think? Were other members of your family creative or?
Not really. My parents are not really at all. It probably does come from music. It probably does come from, my parents were very musical. They loved music, but they don't really play instruments. So I'm not really sure where it started to develop from. I just remember those things really catching my attention. Projects at school, talent quests. It was always my sister and I creating dances and doing them together. And that was from a fairly young age, particularly my sister. I think she was quite an inspiration though.
Is she older or younger?
She's 4 years younger, but she danced from about 3 or 4 years old. So I think from that stage, I started to be surrounded by more dance, which I would have been about seven or 8. And then over the next couple of years developed into when I started to dance. But it certainly wasn't something from the beginning that was what I wanted to do.
My next question is, I don't know whether people can hear from your accent. You're Australian. And how do I put this tactfully? Well, Australia has got, shall we say, a certain stereotype about it. And it doesn't really, ballet dancers doesn't really sit in that sort of macho thing.
Absolutely.
Did you encounter problems when you wanted to, or negative attitudes when you wanted to get into dance at, say, 7, or when you were watching your sister doing it?
Very much. I experienced quite a lot of bullying, actually, particularly at primary school, which was the very early days dancing, which thinking back on could have been quite harmful or quite damaging, really. So it's almost quite amazing to me that at that age I had the resilience to continue, because I don't think I could now, which is really interesting. You know, I think as we develop more fears about the people around us, and at that age maybe we're less influenced by those things. But I certainly remember a lot of young boys having a real problem with the fact that I danced, and I think it's always a misconception about it all. But going back to your Australia comment, yeah, I mean it's not. I think it's the furthest thing from what my dad thought I'd ever do. He's a mechanic, and I think it was probably the last thing on their minds that I might go off and do ballet. But it just sort of stuck. I think there's an element of, there's pockets of artistic brilliance in Australia because everything's so spread out, such a massive country. But you do have, you know, Queensland, Melbourne and Perth ballet companies. They're just not as abundant as in Europe and the UK and even America, really. But I guess artistically, the history of ballet sits in Paris, Russia, those sorts of massive hubs of art. And because Australia is so far away, I think sometimes it takes a long time for that to reach there.
Do you think that's what it...
I think
I suppose that's
took a few years,
but actually I suppose you could be right, couldn't you?
I'm not sure, but in some way it makes a little bit of sense. And yet, I think Australian dancers are brilliant. I think there is a sort of Aussie style, I think, in some ways, although you don't often come across as many, there's a lot of talent in Australia. There's a lot of people hungry to explore the world. And I think that's why a lot of us end up on this side of the world, because we have such a hunger to dive into that rich artistic scene that's on this side of the world that in Australia is not as abundant, like I said.
And what does that look like for a young man wanting to do ballet? I mean, were there facilities open to you? What was it like when you knew you wanted to do it? Was it, I'm just going to go to the local ballet class, or?
Well, luckily for me, well, I'm not sure if it is lucky, but my best friend at primary school, his mum owned a dance school, which was just down the road. And I was from a very small country town west of Sydney. So it was the first immediate thought was the easy one, really, the local dance school, which just happened to be in a tin shed in the back of a sort of dirt car park. And it was really, really humble.
And was that just ballet or different types of dance?
No, every style really, jazz, tap, ballet, bits of contemporary. And I actually didn't want to start ballet at all. My sister had done all the styles, but me and my mate, we decided we'd go along and do, I think we tried a jazz class first or something. And he didn't want to continue. There was something about it that caught my attention. And then I tried a tap class, and that's where I fell in love. That's where I really found my passion. So my roots are really as a tap dancer. And I still have moments that creep up in my career or pop up where I can use that skill again, which I love.
I've seen a few of your tap videos on Instagram and stuff. And again, this level of dance and creativity is one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on the podcast, not just for being, because I suppose we should say, obviously I've given you the intro, but you are the male principal lead dancer at the Birmingham Royal Ballet. So you are without a doubt, world-class dancer. And I don't know, it's quite a privilege for us to have you just chat.
I mean, you make it sound like thank you. Thank you. I try to learn to just say thank you to compliments, but it's a really hard thing to do, isn't it? But I really appreciate your kind words. Yeah, I mean, there's only four principal men here at Birmingham Royal Ballet at the moment, and that fluctuates depending on seasons and years, but it certainly is still something I pinch myself about a lot, because it was the dream to become a principal dancer. That became the biggest thing I was working on for the last 15 years of my life. So I think it still doesn't feel very real sometimes.
And I feel like we have jumped forward a bit, but I did feel like we needed to clarify. So how do we go backwards? When did it become the dream?
Well, I guess jumping back to picking up the tap skill, it was at that point that sort of needed to explore dance a little deeper. And I then met a really amazing tap teacher who at that stage, I try not to complicate this link, but there was a male dancer who had trained at this tap school who went on to join the Royal Ballet in London. And already that link was quite intriguing to me. So I went along to this tap school, took a class, absolutely loved it. 15, 20 people in a room just tapping along and making music and making rhythm, really. That's what I love about tap. It's an instrument. I think in dance, they always say your body's an instrument. Treat it well, tune it up, just like you would any other musical instrument. But when you're actually making a sound with your feet, it's like another part of the orchestra, which I love.
Yeah, well, I used to drum for many years. I used to have
It's
drummer,
percussive.
so it's that percussive element, exactly like you say. It's a skill.
Yeah, definitely.
It's incredible.
It's that's what I loved about it mostly, is that you're absolutely right. That percussive element that you're adding on top of music that's sitting there as well, so you can play with such layers. But it was actually my tap teacher who said to me, look, I think you should explore a little more ballet. And I was like, no, don't ever make me wear tights. It's quite ironic that every day of the week I now wear a pair of tights. But honestly, I remember telling my mum, no way, don't you dare make me go and do that.
Why?
I guess I hadn't been exposed to much classical ballet at that time. Unless in some ways you're privileged enough to be able to go to the opera houses and see the shows. In some ways, and we can talk about this a bit more later on, it's breaking down those barriers to audiences and communities to allow them to be exposed to classical ballet. Because without that, you're sort of limiting a whole group of society from being able to want to be in that world, to want to become a dancer. And it was only really me slowly being exposed to these little things and people believing in me and saying, you've got a skill there, you should explore this more and more and more, that you start knocking on doors or opening your eyes. And then we started to maybe go and watch ballet. But really, I think unless you're privileged enough to be going to the opera houses as a young kid, you miss out on some of those opportunities. And that blows my mind sometimes to think the amount of people out there who could probably be quite brilliant at something. And unless that's an option for them, whether it's financial, whether it's location, there's so many different factors that could limit being exposed to that type of art. And alongside it, sometimes appearing quite elitist as well.
I was just going to say exactly that. I think that ballet, I've only recently been to my first opera.
Right.
And again, one that probably ballet and opera in the same bracket. It's so elitist. You've got to be a lord or a lady to go and sit and watch opera. But I was absolutely blown away by it. And I guess the same would be said for people seeing ballet for the first time.
I think so. I hope so.
We can get into that a bit later, because obviously we're still trying to get to the nitty gritty of obviously what are those key moments from, because obviously now you've gone and experienced this tap class and then you're being pushed mildly hesitantly into ballet.
Yeah. Mildly hesitantly is probably quite tame, really. I think I was quite resistant, but it was also at that time that very luckily on the radio one day in the car, my mum heard an ad for a performing arts high school, and I was about to graduate primary school, and I was sort of dealing with a bit of crap from guys at school. Sadly, one of those had become my best mate, who we started dancing together, and then started to be a little nasty to me, which just took a real turn. And this ad popped up for this performing arts school. So my mum said, well, let's go and check it out. And it's called the McDonald College. I still go back and visit every time I'm in Sydney. And I think that's where it all turned around for me. I walked into this space it was like an arts hub of kids all across Sydney, high school level, coming together for their school day. And we did 4 hours of academics a day. And then you always had 2 hours of your chosen performing arts every single day. So I got to do ballet for 2 hours in the school day every day.
Wow.
Alongside doing maths and English and all that other thing. Which
surrounded by now like-minded people, presumably.
Absolutely.
Which makes a hell of a difference.
And people, incredibly gifted at what they do and needing a safe space to explore that and get better at it and find their voice. And you elect a stream. So your chosen subject or sort of field that you want to excel in. So there's a ballet stream, a dance stream, acting, music, and there's just people merging and collaborating across all of those fields, which absolutely transformed my world, because suddenly I felt safe. Suddenly I wasn't being bullied. Suddenly there were like-minded people around me and I could just do what I loved. So I think in turn you fall deeper in love with it because you're allowed to. You're in a space that gives you space to do that. You feel comfortable. I actually did join the dance stream first. So it was because I still didn't want to give up my tap. I wanted to find a way to do that. It's quite a new thought. I say new, maybe in the last decade, little longer than that, that you can be a ballet dancer and have other skills. And I think a traditional thought, for lack of a better word, is that you are a ballet dancer through and through. And I can even remember competing in competitions when I was 15, doing the ballet section and then doing the tap section, and people coming up to me saying, but you're the ballet dancer, so you should not be doing tap, or vice versa. And especially if you were doing well in both of them, then people really didn't like it. But versatility is so important now. And I'm not sure it always was within the field of classical ballet, but now it's almost like all of your skills that you can bring, you might see in any production on stage.
But then, like you say, going back to that elitist attitude, the ballet is always like, that's a proper 10,000 hours. You've got to become a master. You've got to have blood on your toes. You know, been doing it since you were 5, stretched into positions by all sorts of hardcore militant ballet teachers to become the best. I think that's the stereotype story that you hear, but that's not, as I say, it wasn't even your first love.
No way. And I guess I started at a similar age that a lot of boys do, but it still wasn't a traditional route into it, I guess. But I think that's maybe why, and again, I keep jumping ahead, I'm really sorry, but I think that's why I have continued to have other interests and other skills, because I did at the beginning. It was never a sort of all eggs in one basket thing with dance or ballet. There was always lots of influences.
Which is kind of crazy now in hindsight, knowing the level that you've achieved with your ballet.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, in the middle there was certainly a time I had to dive into just one, because I think, like you're saying, the 10,000 hours, you have to find the full expertise of one thing, which I definitely still have not found in ballet. There's still much to learn, but I think that gap in the middle, I certainly did do that. But I think when I joined that performing arts high school, it just aligned. And I was also really lucky at the same time that a husband and wife duo came back to the school to run the ballet department. And I think it's really important for, regardless of what gender you are, to have different influences from each gender, from all that you can learn from all. And at that time, I needed a male teacher. I needed someone to show me that it was powerful, that it was about strength, that you had to partner the women, that there was a massive focus and importance on that element of being a dancer. And suddenly I was just inspired, my ceiling was blown off. It was like, this is challenging, but it's powerful and it's strong. And I think I really learned so much in that next couple of years. I was sort of between 14 and 16, completely changed in a very short space of time because of that high school and because of that one or two teachers.
And presumably through just puberty and developing, you're probably going to be getting stronger, pumped full of testosterone. Suddenly you can pick the ballet dancers up
Absolutely.
A bit easier than it perhaps was before.
Yeah, and I think we weren't just doing ballet on every 2 days a week. We'd be lifting weights and doing stuff that was important, so that I had an inbuilt core strength that I truly believe I've sort of carried with me through my career, that it's sometimes you can be quite wrapped up in cotton wool and taught ballet, and sometimes just to be let flown is just, just spin as many times as you can, just jump as high as you can. And then you can start to tame elements and coach elements. I work on my technique every day of my career. I'm never going to reach a level of perfection. That's why I continue to do it, because who knows if it even exists. But if I wasn't getting out there and just having a bit of fun and flying around the stage with an energy that hopefully the audience find infectious, what's the point in doing it? If I'm always aiming for that perfection thing, I think you take some of the soul out of it. So there was that, like, at 15 or 16, I was almost given the freedom to go for it, jump. Some of the steps now that people still say are some of my strongest assets as a dancer, I learned then. I learned when I was 15 in that period of time. So I think it's a really important period of time. Don't get me wrong, the technique stuff is bloody important, but the fun element and the just giving it a bloody go is also really important.
You're still a performer and an entertainer at the end of the day.
Exactly. And most of the time you're going to be playing a character and you've got to be telling a story. So there's so many different skills that you start to layer through your career. But I think at that point in time, it was just, I was let rip in a way. I wasn't bubble wrapped and looked after. I was told, lift the girl. Let's do the hard stuff. Let's learn the hard pas de deux. And I remember the school, we used to have a sort of pre-professional ballet company, but it'd be like pre-professional, I guess. We were young, putting on full-length productions of ballet. So we were doing Nutcracker. I was doing Prince and the grand pas de deux in Nutcracker that are still challenging to do at my level of the career. So I learned a lot then, alongside feeling really valued, feeling like I must be okay at this. And there's suddenly the potential for this to become a career.
And how did that suddenly become the potential for it to come out? Not just to being surrounded, because obviously you've had to get from Australia to the Royal Ballet School, right?
Yeah.
So how, I mean, presumably does someone spot a talent in you? Do you go through rigorous tryouts? How does that sort of work?
There are a couple of different routes. The traditional route is you audition, send off an application and pop over to an open audition, an open call, and those types of things are quite brutal.
Pop over from Australia.
Pop over, yeah, on that short flight.
Easy.
I was, again, another lucky moment perhaps. There's a really big ballet competition in Sydney that hosts people from all over Australia and New Zealand called the Ballet Scholarship of the Sydney Eisteddfod, and I entered that. I think there was about 180 contestants, possibly more. We all perform a classical solo. Then you're whittled down and eliminated, and then you perform a contemporary solo, and then you do master classes, and there's various stages of this competition. And I got selected to be one of the final 8 dancers. So we perform at the Sydney Opera House. It's really quite an experience. And I won this competition. And when that happened, you get the opportunity, one of the prizes is you get the opportunity to go off and take classes with the Australian Ballet, Royal Ballet School in London, or English National Ballet School, which is also in London. And alongside that prize, a lady at the high school we've spoken about, Macdonald College, who was running this sort of after-hours ballet program in a way, she had worked at the Royal Ballet School in the sort of development department for many years and reached out and said, could Lachlan come and take class as he can with this prize, but could we extend it to maybe 2 weeks so he gets a really good introduction to what it's like. And alongside that, I think he'd be really keen to audition. So that was really lucky. I don't think that happens a lot. And I was popped in the Royal Ballet School in October.
I'm going to just stop you. You say lucky, but she must have seen something. If she's worked for those people, she's no fool, shall we say. She must have seen something in you, whether that's drive, dedication, sheer talent. So I'm sure luck happens, but you've obviously, like you said, in that time at the school and you've won this competition, you've clearly put in the work. So don't call it luck. Not telling you what to do, sorry, just to say that I don't think that's luck. You've obviously put in the work and you've got this talent, because otherwise she wouldn't have put you forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it's, alongside that, I was always really clear for some reason, and whether this was that I owned a DVD or probably VHS at the time of the Royal Ballet doing something, but I always wanted to leave Australia. And not because I didn't love it there, but like we touched on at the beginning, there's this rich art scene over here. So I always wanted to go to the Royal Ballet School. I don't know what it was. It was something, I was hooked. So when this opportunity popped up, no one ever questioned me going or staying in Australia, sorry.
Do you remember like a moment when you went, God, the Royal Ballet, that's now the dream? Because obviously before that you were just like, great, I'm just surrounded by like-minded creative individuals and I can explore this talent. But was there a moment that you can pinpoint where you go, yeah, man, this is an option. Royal Ballet is an option, or at least it's in my sights?
No, sadly, I don't remember one moment. But I remember a couple of influences that led me to want to. And I'd see videos online of the Opera House or interviews of dancers, and it just looked like the most incredible space to be performing. And I found that really inspiring. Alongside the man I touched on earlier from my tap school who joined the Royal Ballet, found his career really inspiring and just wanted to follow in his footsteps, really. He was a massive inspiration to me. Stephen McRae, he still dances with the Royal Ballet. He'd often come back to Sydney, work with me, coach me a little bit, or even teach me a tap solo or something random. So we were always in touch with each other in some way.
So you had that influence, like you said earlier on, of seeing it being able to be done. You saw a fellow Australian performing with the Royal Ballet, coming back, giving you all this, feeling like a mentor in some respects, and showing you that, it's possible. Again, you don't become someone's almost mentor unless they see a talent in you. So, again, that emphasizes the fact that it's not luck.
No, I appreciate that again.
Sometimes it takes someone else outside of you, because I don't know, it's almost that humble brag, isn't it? It's fine if you're American, but I don't know about Australian culture, but definitely not if you're English. We're much more reserved about our merits and our skill set.
Yeah. I think it's always nice to hear it from other people, isn't it? Self-belief goes a really long way. It's an incredibly powerful thing if well managed, because it can so easily just become arrogance or a sort of negative ego, right? And I think it's balancing that. But when you start to feel that there's a little bit of value coming back, that somebody's recognizing, even better if they're recognizing something in you haven't, then that's really powerful.
And winning a competition, getting the opportunity to extend your stay at the Royal Ballet School.
Yeah.
All of those.
It was amazing. And but I spent 2 weeks in London. The director, she hadn't popped in to watch class at all. And I think it got to one of the last days. We were getting a little bit anxious, but I was blown away by the school and the talent, and was actually quite emotional with my mum, who came with me. I said, I'm definitely not good enough to come here. Like, even if I got a place, I don't think this is where I want to be. I feel really, really uncomfortable. I'm definitely not good enough. And Mum was like, that's okay. Like, you had a wonderful experience, and not everyone gets to come and take class. So you did that, and you participated in everything for those 2 weeks, and you've seen it, you've been immersed in it. You're going to take something away from it. But on the final day, and ballet class, ballet warm-up, which we do every single day of our career, is in sort of hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half of a build-up of technique, I guess. So we start holding on to the bar, moving just our lower legs, bringing in higher stuff, and then we move into the center for half of the class, where you start turning, and then by the end of it, you're jumping crazily across the room. And she popped in to watch me do one exercise at the end of the bar, which lasts all of maybe 45 seconds, and then left the room again. And I thought, oh, she definitely doesn't like me. And then she popped back at the very end of the class, saw me do another exercise that I think was maybe a minute, if that. They're quite brief. And she left again, and I thought, oh, well, that's okay. Sometimes it just doesn't go your way, I guess. And we left it at that. We left the Royal Ballet School. We got on the plane home, and I sort of had a good cry with Mum on the plane, and just thought, well, that's sad, but I don't think I'm good enough. And like all I was just saying, until a couple of weeks later, and my teachers called me in back in Sydney and said, what are you doing in January? Bear in mind, this was November. What are you doing in January? I said, I'll probably be on holiday or by the beach or something. They said, I don't think so. You're going to be in London at the Royal Ballet School on a full scholarship. So 2 months after auditioning, if you could say that, participating in those 2 weeks of classes, that day that she'd popped in and watched me dance for about a minute and a half, they gave me a full scholarship to the school.
How did that feel?
I mean, unbelievably scary.
But going back to like what you've already said, is to have your skills validated by external elements. Doesn't get much more external than the Royal Ballet School. But I suppose what I'm asking is, in that moment, were you like, holy shit, that is the most amazing thing? But then was there maybe a few seconds afterwards, oh my God, I've got to go to the Royal Ballet School?
All of that. And I'm feeling a little bit emotional even talking about it, and I don't reflect on this very often. So it's a really powerful moment in my life, in the development of my career and who I've become. That day, being told that information and getting in the car with my mum, and I remember she picked me up from the train station and we drove down the road, and I said, Mum, I think you better pull over. And she went, okay. And I said, I've got to go to the Royal Ballet School in January. She went, okay, that's amazing, but there was no way my parents could afford to send me. There was no way. And I said, but it's on a full scholarship, Mum, so you don't have to pay anything. And she just burst into tears, as did I. And ironically, we're actually sitting in the car in the suburb where Stephen McRae, who was my influence, where he lived, where he was born. So that's kind of strange thinking back on that just now, but that's one of those crazy universe moments, right? Like, that's so weird. But it was such an incredible moment alongside the, I've got to pack up my life here and move in 8 weeks and leave my family and leave home. And I'd always lived at home when I was 16. I was well and truly, that was my base. I wasn't one of those kids who went off to boarding school at 10 or 11 who was used to this. It was a really scary prospect to be on the other side of the world.
That's young for anyone to be that far away from your family.
Yeah. And yet,
that shows bravery.
I think you need that. I think you need to. It was always because that's what I wanted. It was impossible at times, but it was what I wanted. It was the dream, the Royal Ballet School. That's where I wanted to go. I wanted to be in London.
So what's that like? I mean, we'll jump now. I mean, what's that like for a 16-year-old landing in London? How does that work? Do you stay at the school?
Yeah. So obviously we're all in the UK and the academic year begins in September.
So you're going in, you've missed it.
Halfway. So I auditioned in the October with the year group that had already started. So do you know what was actually quite strange? Sorry to jump again a little, but when I was auditioning, I remember finding it, the imposter syndrome was scary but I was trying to just do everything to the best of my ability, jet lagged or not, shit or not, just trying to finish every exercise. And I can remember the teacher sort of saying to everyone, look at this Aussie kid off the plane and doing all this stuff. And I thought, I was just so embarrassed. I just wanted the floor to open up because I was just trying to do
in a negative
best.
way?
No. You need to copy this guy who's been dropped in pretty much.
Should be jet lagged
which was horrible in a way because not that he was trying to turn anybody against each other, but it was a little bit of a play, and trying to get a little more something out of these guys who eventually ended up joining their year, that was fully established for the last 5 months, dropped in January in the middle of winter from a sort of 35-degree summer in Australia. It was snowing when I landed. At the time, we lived in a boarding house in Barons Court, not far from Hammersmith, and a beautiful old house. I remember dragging all my suitcases up. At the time, I tried to take my keyboard with me on the plane, which was going to cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And my parents were like, no bloody way, we'll just get you a new one if we can. We never did that either, but there was so much I didn't know. I would, humble little existence in Western Sydney and exposed to these sort of beautiful elements and fantastic moments of competitions and ballet and dance and what that opened my eyes up to. And yet getting on a plane and moving to London was just the strangest thing. I can remember packing ridiculous things, packing my favorite DVDs or packing silly things. It was just crazy. And I got into this small room at the top of this house and was sharing a room with a guy. And that was already this is a tiny room. I've never shared a room. Having to go do the grocery shopping for the first time. I hadn't done those things. And then starting school and gradually everybody leaving. Mum flew home. My 2 teachers I spoke about, they came over actually as well to London, and everybody left and I started at the Royal Ballet School, and I can remember being so homesick. So homesick. It was pretty daunting. Alongside that, what I touched on about joining a year group that's already quite formed, they've figured each other out by then, and I think it took another probably 6 months for them to fully figure me out. So the first couple of months was really lonely. Really tough. And I remember just thinking, there's a reason I'm here. There's something I want to achieve out of this. So I've got to stick at it. But there were certainly days that constantly ring Mum, I'm not good enough. I can't do this. I can't stay here. And she had to sort of suck up through tears. No, you can absolutely do this. But all she wanted to say with open arms was come home.
Son, yeah.
Come home. Let me protect you and let me make you safe. And yet at the same time, she knew I wanted to be there.
But that goes part and parcel to the resilience that you've already built up, whether you know it or not, because you are young.
It is young.
That's young. Just to move to a different city you're 18 when you go away to university and then it's a bit different, but 16 is
Yeah, immersed in the centre of London. For 6 months I lived in Barons Court, and then we move into Covent Garden, which is a privilege. I mean, what an honour to live in the centre of Covent Garden and go to the Royal Ballet School, which is next door to the Royal Opera House. And every lunchtime walk across, there's a bridge that spans Floral Street called the Bridge of Aspiration. To walk across there and have lunch in the Royal Opera House canteen and see the principal dancers, the superstars of the ballet world, rehearsing when you walk to lunch. And, it was, again, I walked into another inspiring space where
it suddenly becomes a bigger driver for you to go, I can see what others are achieving.
And this constant, small fish, big pond thing where, you're forced to grow in a really beautiful way. I'd felt that so many different times in phases, going to that high school, then moving to London. And I think you're constantly being tested. And I think life does that to you. But you're almost, in some way, I was braver than I probably could be now. It's quite fascinating.
That's what I was going to say, because you have to accept that test. And you have to have the bravery, because it's very easy for a 16-year-old to go, I won that competition at the Sydney Opera House. That was pretty special. Maybe I'll just, rest on my laurels there. But again, resilience, bravery, determination, passion. If you don't have passion, you don't move all the way across the world to do what you love.
No. And I think that level of passion is deep within my personality somewhere. And whether it came from being thrust into those situations where passion was entirely necessary to succeed in any way or to even see it through. But I think passion is the driving force behind tough times that makes it makes the shit all worth it. If you're incredibly passionate about something, and I am about everything that I do, I try to be, because I want to feel whatever I'm doing burn like fire. It has to feel like there's just no way I could live without this thing. And I think that's probably what got me through this undying passion to succeed in that in some way. And at that time, it was to be a principal dancer with the Royal Ballet.
Again, I'm just going for probably some made-up stereotype I've got. Is it quite cutthroat within the school?
Yes, it's very cutthroat.
Got any stories you can
sometimes wrongly so. I think sometimes this is what is slowly changing and where we're going to find a balance in training. And I think this exists in many different careers, is that there's an old-fashioned approach to things that's quite brutal. There's an element of bullying in that coaching, and there's an element of some nasty comments that are made in order to try to force you to try harder.
It's like harshness in the aim of motivation. It's like those old sports films that you watch. You've got to want it. You got to, you got to be the best. And I think that's a very old school motivation tactic that I'm not sure is. I mean, I suppose it depends on your personality type.
Definitely,
but
definitely,
it's not very nurturing, shall we say?
No, and I think sometimes my approach now, if I'm ever leading a room or choreographing, which we can touch on later, but is just be kind. Understand that we've all been there and somebody has been really nasty to us, and that probably has the opposite effect of what they had hoped. And there were times when, in training at the Royal Ballet School, people were in tears in ballet class. And don't get me wrong, it's an incredible career. It's an incredible thing to be part of, but it's ballet. And there are really serious issues going on out there in the world. And I've always tried to maintain a healthy level of perspective. My sort of triple pirouette or things that I'm trying to do that are technically difficult, and there's many things like that, really, if they go badly, the world is going to keep spinning and it's all going to be okay. And yes, I want to become the best dancer I can be, and that is important to me. But really, a healthy level of perspective has always kept me really grounded.
Is that hard to do when you're surrounded by people who are probably their only focus is ballet, their only thing, this is life or death. If I don't make it, this, I mean, and I'm not saying that wasn't the feeling for you.
No.
But having that healthy level of perspective, do you know what I mean? Is that difficult to maintain when you're surrounded by, I suppose, the elite of the elite who are cutthroat?
It is difficult to maintain, especially when you're all pitched against each other. And there's a strange thing sometimes within those organizations that they want to, and I'm not saying this exactly for the period of time that I was at the Royal Ballet School, but there's certainly the air of we want to produce 15 to 20 identical dancers. But that doesn't really work in the industry beyond graduating from a school like that. No one company is going to want 15 dancers from that graduate year. You know, everybody ends up spread across the world. Jobs are hard to come by, but you won't get more than 2 or 3 dancers going to the same company on graduation. And yet we tried to produce identical dancers. And really, I think what that misses sometimes is that the individual skills of each dancer
And
is sometimes
personality.
absolute personality is overlooked. Sometimes what people are good at individually is the thing we should be highlighting more than trying to make them conform to a sort of system. And I think that's sometimes where, in the worst cases, those places can be quite damaging. I've always had really nice experiences, but you hear many a story. And then, like you say, there's personality types and everybody takes things in different ways based on their journeys and how they got somewhere and how brightly their passions burn. But how much do we tolerate, I guess is what I'm saying, for what we love. And that's all a very individual thing that we definitely don't know when we're 17, really. But it is cutthroat. And there were times, like I said, people are in tears over ballet. And it's really important. But anybody in anything physical, in any career, can give it up on any day. And sometimes that's out of their control. Sometimes that's injury. Sometimes there's no jobs. So you want to leave those people with a positive story to tell about however long their time doing something was. Because if I had to stop at 18, would all my stories have been positive? Probably not. So no matter how long somebody does it for, I think you want mostly the ratio of their time to be more positive than not. That's just my opinion. I'm sure there's many. I'm sure there's differing ways to train dancers and to train anyone in any field, but that's just what I would think is more correct. But it's only because there's certain comments been made to me that stick with you forever. They're still in the back of my head. And every time I look at myself in the mirror as a dancer, they're the alarm bells. Yeah, of course. You look at yourself and we're our own worst critic anyway. Cool. You know, most of the time we know what we've done wrong before somebody tells us, especially when as a dancer, I spend my entire day looking in a mirror. That's what I do. So we're so body critical. We're so critical of our technique. I know when something's shit. I know when I look in the mirror what I need to work on, really. And it's brilliant to have that third eye of a coach because you need that. You really need that because you can't see it all. But most of the time we have a natural intuition about what's good and bad. And there are still things I look in the mirror and are alarm bells to me because of a comment that was made when you're at an influential age.
And like you say, there's ways of coaching and ways of just human interaction and personal skills these days that were probably very much like, well, this is how the Bolshoi in Russia did it, and they used to beat you with a cane if you didn't get your leg up high enough or
Absolutely,
whatever. Yeah. But that's so outdated now, and also human rights, you probably can't do that these days.
Definitely not. And I think we've learned a lot. And I think we've also realized that those approaches to training are learnt behaviors as well. So it's not necessarily anybody's fault. It's almost what people have expected was right or what they just thought was going to get the best results.
That's interesting. Okay, so you've been learning at the Royal Ballet School. So what happens once you graduate? You said there's limited jobs in the ballet market. So how is that a daunting prospect coming up to graduation, or are you already auditioning for companies or?
Yeah, so having joined in January, I had 2.5 years in total at the school. So the first 6 months flew by, basically. And then I had a year of the second year of the program, which is when I really started to find my feet in the British style of ballet and really wanting to go to one of the English companies. And then you're absolutely right. Graduate year is mostly spent for a lot of dancers running around auditioning on flights, going off to different companies on a weekend to their open call where you turn up and some of them have 200, 250 dancers, similar to sort of the competitions I mentioned earlier where you rock up, you do a ballet class. If you're not tapped on the head to leave the room, you get to do a solo and maybe you'll hear from them in a few weeks. And if you don't, which you often don't, then no job. So I think a lot of graduate year is spent doing that. My experience, again, was, I'll say lucky again. I did one audition in Vienna, which was a sort of a beautiful weekend, a great experience in the company. And I'd gotten through through to the final round of the audition. I didn't end up hearing from the company, but I had a really positive experience.
Vienna's a wicked city as well.
Fantastic.
Anyway, that's a
Fantastic.
different topic, but
Yeah.
sorry, carry on.
I need to head back there a bit older. But it was a sort of a nice experience for me. And then I had, like I said earlier, I had my sights set on the Royal Ballet. So I think throughout graduate year as well, that there were a couple of little competitions that popped up at the Royal Ballet School. And one of them, we always worked on our classical solos. So, Nutcracker Prince, Sleeping Beauty Prince, the classics, the dancing solos. And then this competition in particular focused on the artistic content of character within certain solos. So maybe it was the solos with less actual dancing in them, but more where you were trying to tell more of a story. And there was a solo choreographed by the ex-director of Birmingham Royal Ballet, Sir David Bintley, to Hobson's Choice, the British play. And it was Will Mossop, the character, and he does a clog dance. So he wears all these different shoes and then he clogs at the end of it. And my tap ears went pricking up. And I thought, I've got to learn this solo. So I learned it off YouTube and I performed it at this competition. I did really well. Not that it was really a competition at the school, but a chance to perform. And the director here, Sir David Bintley in Birmingham Royal Ballet, he got wind of the fact I'd danced this solo, that I'd learnt it off YouTube, and sent one of the coaches from the company down to sort of prep me on it. I ended up performing it at a small event at the Royal Opera House. And from that day, he had his eye on me. And in about February, March of 2012 in graduate year, so this is just after I'd been to Vienna, I got called in and they said, well, you've got a job with Birmingham Royal Ballet. And he just had his eye set on me from the moment doing that solo. And I was just really, really lucky that had happened and the time had coincided with that. Because I think most graduates are just waiting for somebody to say yes, waiting for somebody to want you.
And is that a solo that you've ever seen anyone else? I mean,
I hadn't seen it performed.
No. I know, obviously, I'm no expert in ballet in any aspect, but for you to choose that specific routine, obviously off the back of your tap, and for the guy who choreographed it to see it, who was then the director of Birmingham Royal.
I know. It was just, again, one of those lucky universe moments where a few things collided and people heard and got the right words, I guess. It was a really beautiful moment. And then you can relax. Then I relaxed and just enjoyed the rest of my graduate year knowing that I had a job up here in Birmingham. So it sounds like that happened really easily, and it sort of did. And yet it was the sort of result of layering of versatility.
Different skill sets, different styles of dance, the ability to push yourself when others are maybe just sat there waiting because they're waiting for auditions. You're like, well, I'd rather have the performance practice and do this competition. Let's push myself out of my comfort zone. Again, something we're always talking about.
Yeah.
And you could have done a traditional dance like everybody else, and you went, no, actually, I'll do this one that's a clog dance because I've got my tap background.
Yeah. And I think it really just was the tap thing.
Again, don't get me wrong, that is sounding a bit lucky, but it's all of these things converging into this moment, isn't it?
Yeah. And it was the tap. I could say, I was really intrigued on playing the character. I was really interested in exploring something different. And I think now I would say that. Now that's what I love about what I do. But at that time it was like, oh, this guy basically taps on stage and I love tap. That's my thing. So this is a chance to do it. And I was so lucky at that. And the school latched onto that as well and went, oh, we've got something here. So there we go. Back to what I was saying about coaching and training. I have a beautiful experience with them going, this is another skill of Lachlan's and we want to use that. And we recognize that. So I was allowed to progress individually in that way.
While you were at the Royal Ballet School?
Yeah, and this as well. I was at the school and they started letting me perform this solo everywhere because of the sort of tap element of it. So that was Lachlan can do that, so do it. And I'm sure it must have been quite fucking frustrating for all the other people in the year at times. So that was a nice thing to feel valued for. And that is the reason I got my job here in Birmingham. And I've been here ever since for 13 years.
Wow.
I think it's my 13th season, I think.
I was going to say, because from my research, 2012 you joined the Birmingham Royal Ballet.
Yeah, so what's this, beginning of my 12th or 13th season? Yeah, I lose track.
And what does that look like? You were just a cast member when you join, or...?
Yeah, so then you join the company and...
You've got to presumably work your way up the ranks to be the principal, which has taken you that 12... When was it last year?
Took me 12 years, yeah. There's 5 ranks here. in the company. Every company differs slightly, but usually around 5. So you'd join as an artist, which is also called quarter ballet based on the company. And that's sort of the bulk of the company. That's the biggest percentage of dancers. They deliver all the group dances on stage. For the women, that's the swans. So that's the sort of the grounding of the career. And I think I spent 6 years at that rank. And then it's a first artist. So it's sort of a recognition of you being a good quarter ballet member. Maybe you've started to do a couple of more featured roles. And then beyond that, you have soloist, first soloist, and then principal. For the first couple of years of my career, it was I guess I would say a slower progression. And yet what I've learned is to compare to nobody else's journey, because the repertoire that we perform every year is so different. So you can't compare anybody else's speed at getting to a certain rank, because everybody's performing different roles at any given moment each year. So even if you duplicated the repertoire, then a different dancer would respond in a different way, is what I'm trying to say, I guess. So I was sort of a couple of years as an artist, and I got a really bad injury then as well. So my first year in the company set me back. I was off stage for about a year, which was gut-wrenching, because I was watching all these people who I just joined with start to do a couple of nice little roles. And it felt like crucial moments. It felt like things I was going to never catch up from.
How old are you at this point then?
19, 20?
19. And presumably you've already given your body quite a battering from years of this dancing.
Yeah. And what I learned really early is that I get on stage and I bash quite a lot. I'm sort of entirely fueled by adrenaline, which I love. And I love that space. I love finding that flow with a performance where I don't feel like me. But I find I can give a lot more on stage than I can in a rehearsal because of that adrenaline. And sometimes that hurts. Sometimes the next day I feel the effects of that. And yet I wouldn't want it any other way, because for me, the whole reason of being a performer is so for that 3 hours, I am someone else and I am somewhere else, and I need to give that audience a good show. I also think if I was trying to control that level of energy, I wouldn't find that state of flow, or it wouldn't be authentic. Obviously that's just where I function. That's just at that heightened level. It's that passion again. I think it's wanting to give that level to a show, but it does hurt. And how do you assess for that? Again, I'm going to make some sweeping generalization. I imagine as the principal dancer, do you get access to a little bit more physiotherapy maybe than say a quarter ballet member would, because they're just, I don't want to be derogatory, but they're just a one of 40 or one of 20, whereas you're the principal or the first soloist or whatever that is. Is there? I'm not sure that there is extra privilege, but what there is as a principal, which I've only experienced for the last 18 months really, is more time to rest. So as a principal dancer, I will never really perform 2 shows in a day, which just gives a bit of downtime. So you can start to manage your preparation, your recovery time. There wouldn't be any extra privileges like extra physio or anything like that. And actually, if there were, I would disagree that they should be there, because it's a strange, it's like any career. You progress to the top of something, and at the top of it's probably where you do the least work. It's really interesting, but the work you do is heightened, and the pressure on you is higher. I think everything's financial, everything's budgets, and we're in a really tough time in economies generally, that I think finding the money for a sports therapist within a ballet company is low on the list in terms of funding. And we scrape by doing what we do now, doing the shows we do now. And I think it's a challenging balance putting on or running an arts company. It's a challenging balance. It's a challenge to do anything now. Things are a lot more expensive than they used to be. For us to go on a tour, the costs have increased 40, 50% pre-COVID. So for us to do the same show in exactly the same way already costs us more. So we probably make a loss rather than break even now. And that's a big difference when it comes to doing performances that ultimately provide dancers with a really good and healthy career, one they can progress through. So you start to limit opportunities because you can't afford to do as many weeks of shows.
And then we go back down that spiral of it suddenly becoming elitist because there's only minimal jobs because all the companies have gone out of business.
Exactly. And dancers stop moving on from companies because they need the money. So there isn't as much of a flow or movement through the career across the world, so gaps open up less.
No
It's
one wants to not know when they're going to pay their bills.
exactly.
So if you're paid as a dancer within a company and you've got safety and you've got some security,
Why would you let that go?
yeah, of course.
So it's a tricky time now, and I think there's so many different departments to balance within a company like that. I mean, we're sitting in the technical department now chatting, and it's a delicate balance saying, well, hang on, our trucks cost this much to move the set across the country. That ballet also costs this X thousands of pounds to just perform per show, alongside all of the dancers' needs, the physio. So jumping back to what we were chatting about, there isn't really an in-house therapist or psychologist, but they're things that are provided to us. And we have external companies we can go to for that. On that subject, when I was injured badly, it was the thing that got me back to dancing, was seeing a sports psychologist, was sitting down with someone, and I had one session and it transformed my recovery.
A psychologist, not a physiotherapist.
Not a physiotherapist.
Interesting.
So I had a long time of rest, MRIs and nonsense really. And it's the most frustrating thing when you sit around doing nothing.
What was said in that one interview with the sports psychologist that you went, yeah, okay, I might be injured now, but I'll be back. Do you remember? Or because I think
I can remember a couple of things.
One interview, one meeting with them sounds.
I know. There's and it was kind of wacky as well. I had piles of A4 paper and coloured pens, and we were drawing things and just making scribbles on pieces of paper. And I remember finding it really bizarre, but loving it at the same time, because she'd say, pick a colour that you would define your injury as, and then, okay, draw a shape or draw something with the energy that you feel towards the frustration of your injury. Or one I really remember is she said, okay, you must have had a trampoline growing up as a kid. And I said, yes. And she said, okay, mine was in my ankle and my foot and my left foot. So she said, okay, I want you to stand on one leg, close your eyes. You're on the ground and you're hopping on your right foot. And I was fine. And she went, okay, now you're hopping on your left foot. And I squinted my face and made an ugly shape. And she went, why did you do that? Because we were just imagining it. You weren't actually doing it. So your brain is already telling you that it's going to be painful. And you've had 8 months off dance, so your foot is absolutely fine. And it's your brain telling you that it's going to hurt. And she said, okay, I want you to do the same thing, but I want you to be on a trampoline. Is it easier or harder? Are you jumping higher? Of course, all the answers are easy to answer, and we think they are. But at that time when you're stuck in that space of I'm injured, and as a dancer, you start being defined as the injured dancer, it can really affect your personality. And it started to affect my persona at work because I was the injured one. And like I said, I was in trainers, I was walking around absolutely fine. I just couldn't dance. So people sort of start to look at you like, what is actually wrong with you? And I remember that one meeting with her, and particularly that story of squinting my eyes at just the thought of hopping on my bad foot, not actually doing it. And it blew my mind. So the next time I got back and I tried it, and it was just a matter of overriding my brain and doing it again and again and again and teaching my own brain that this isn't going to hurt anymore.
Well, your brain is there to keep you safe, isn't it? It's trying to go, oh, if it winced a bit then, we better not do that again.
Absolutely.
Better not do that again.
Absolutely.
Wow.
So that stuff I think is really powerful. I'm a big advocate for that when you're coming back from an injury, because I think there's the physical part, then there's the psychological part. And I think sometimes the psychological part can be more damaged through being injured. Especially for me, it was a year into the career. So you consider that if I had a year off, a year into the career, that's 50% of my career injured. And so that's a difficult balance to come back from if it's not well managed, well looked after. And I see a lot of young dancers now have a similar thing happen, because I think you graduate from a school, you join a company, the workload increases because you're expected to do, I think in my first couple of months, I did 45 shows of some production, and you're expected to be on all the time, and it's a tough thing to suddenly do.
Well, physically endure all of that after.
Definitely. So I see a lot of young dancers get injured early and not know how to manage that and feel like a failure because they got injured and couldn't manage the workload.
Do you ever offer some sort of words of advice?
I try to. I think it's for me, it's a level of respect as well that is focused on looking after them, protecting them, providing them with support, making sure their well-being is good. But it is sad to see sometimes, and you consider that percentage of the time of their career spent being injured, and that can be a really hard thing to shift. So I was really grateful to come back from that injury, and it taught me a lot. You learn a lot being injured.
Again,
it made me hungry.
Again, it's that inherent resilience that you've shown the whole way. And I think that's part of the big story. There's many times that you hear that athletes, dancers, people get injured and then that's it, game over.
Pretty much, yeah. I think it made me hungrier to want to get back and do the roles I was seeing other people doing. But I want to give that a go.
And as you say, I know companies are very different, but Birmingham is probably quite special in that fact that the level of productions are quite diverse, aren't they? There's everything from the classic at Christmas, like you say, the Nutcracker, Cinderella, whatever that might be, to super contemporary performances. Like you say, I wouldn't want to say that ballet, you end up dancing the same roles, but is that one of the keys that makes Birmingham quite a good company because of its diversity of...
Yeah, I think so. I do think that wherever you end up in the world now, the level of versatility present in any company's repertoire is higher than ever before. A lot of ballet companies are turning to more contemporary work to appeal to a wider audience. Like I said earlier, I think that's what the industry needs to do. We need to have bums on seats. People need to be coming in and being exposed to the art form.
I suppose it's difficult when you're on stage with all the lights and everything, but in terms of the bums on seats thing, have you seen a decline? In people on seats, or is the demand for ballet less, more?
The demand for ballet is a really interesting thing. The things that I think, or we as a company, particularly dancers, think might sell well, can sometimes be half full. And the things that you don't think are going to be successful can be packed. And sometimes trying to understand what audiences want is a really complicated thing.
And I guess that's not really your role as the dancer, is it? Who is that? The directors of the company? Are they got to do the research and go, well, we need to do something more contemporary, but we also need to do Cinderella didn't do so well at Christmas, we'll bring back the Nutcracker, or vice versa. Or...
Exactly that. We need to do things that appeal to the audiences that we're taking our work to. For us, I think lately that's been a sort of selling of Birmingham-inspired ballets.
That does lead me nicely on to the fact that one of the biggest contemporary pieces that Birmingham has done is a celebration of another Birmingham iconic, is Black Sabbath. Can you tell me a little bit about Black Sabbath as a contemporary piece and why it was so enjoyable? But also, this is where one of your other talents came to fruition, singing. You end up singing the blooming solo in the whole show in front of Sharon, Osbourne, Tony Iommi, all these people. So, well, what's my question? Tell me a little bit about the Black Sabbath piece. How did that come about? What's it like doing something so contemporary with such iconic rock music? And then how on earth did it come about that Mr. Renaissance Man got to use one of his other talents of singing within all that? And go.
Right. Sabbath was, I say Sabbath because that's what we sort of call it internally, but when we heard Black Sabbath the ballet, we were all like, whoa, okay, this is way out there. And this has been one of our director, Carlos Acosta, that's been one of his visions to sort of channel different ideas, to sell different things to our audiences. What better than Black Sabbath in Birmingham? Opening night of that show was the most exhilarating experience I've ever had on stage and ever will have on stage.
Tell me more. I want to get into that. Why?
Why
was it different?
I mean, there was a level of energy from the audience that I think in traditional ballet productions, audiences don't feel they can react like. People were screaming, people were on their feet, and the dancers were on stage, literally headbanging, being shouted at like rock stars. And the adrenaline, to build on what I said that I function entirely on adrenaline, was off the charts. I've never felt anything so fucking exhilarating in my life. We were buzzing.
And just to separate that, it is adrenaline. You call it that on the night. You don't sit there and go, oh, I'm nervous. It's always excitement. It's always adrenaline for you. It's not nerves.
I get nervous about particular steps, not really a whole show. So I'll be nervous that I hope that one thing goes well, or nervous that I hit that lift or that turn or those things. And you know, it's really interesting because over the length of a career I've had so far, those things become a similar type of step, which tells me that there's a pattern anyway. So it's probably not that I'm afraid of that one thing. I just have a little bit of an inbuilt anxiousness surrounding certain things.
But you know not to trust your brain because
absolutely, I do my best.
Was telling you something crazy when you were injured, wasn't it? And you had to see that sports site.
It was, yes.
Anyway, opening night
Sabbath. And I don't think audiences knew what to expect. And we announced it to the press, and it went on sale in March, and it sold out in 5 days. We don't sell on that scale. We never had. And suddenly it was like, whoa. And when we sold it and it was sold out, we hadn't created a single step of the ballet.
Oh, wow.
So when there were 2,500 people coming to 9 shows and we didn't have a step, I'm sure the creatives went, shit, now this has got to be good because there's a pressure now.
You have to see if there's a demand.
You do.
And hell, there was a demand for that if it's sold out like that, but not even a step. That's a little extreme.
It's scary.
Yeah.
We started to create it, and I think it was in any creative process, it differs from choreographer to choreographer. There's a bit of an exploration period. They're trying things out, trying out ideas, what's possible, what's not. We had a live guitarist on stage. The whole thing is pretty electric. It's the furthest thing from something like Swan Lake. And dancers define our careers based on those traditional productions. So to explore something brand new, like Black Sabbath the ballet, and explore it in a more contemporary way is challenging for dancers because we're not really taught to measure our careers or our success based on something like Black Sabbath, a role created out. We're taught that doing the Prince in Swan Lake is where you look successful, and that doing that many pirouettes and making that perfect is what makes you the best dancer. And suddenly we were headbanging, and the women in point shoes headbanging to War Pigs, and I think that was a challenging place for us dancers to be, actually. And if I'm really honest, there were points in the creative process we were like, this isn't working, or we don't feel we can connect with this because it's not where we place our identities. So at times we didn't think it was going to be successful. We knew it was sold out, and we were just like, these reviews are not going to be good because we don't feel this is what we do. And I think maybe that's an imposter syndrome thing too, because you put a ballet dancer outside of their context, and sometimes we're not very comfortable. We like being told what to do.
Imposter syndrome shows up when you get out, exactly like you said, get out of your comfort zone, you're trying something new. So it's all about having to try and reframe that. But that must have been tricky if you're all sat there going, oh, how do you connect with it?
Yeah. And because
is that a choreography thing? Is that
yeah, I mean, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got, and this is sidetracking a little, but it was a solo I found really, really hard, and I could not connect with it, and it was from Swan Lake. And a coach of mine, who's a very dear friend now, she said to me, you have to find one thing about this solo you enjoy, and you have to put all of your energy into that. Because if you don't like it, you have to dance it. And the audience have to believe you. And they have to come along with this journey with you. And if they'll be able to tell.
It's not just a series of steps, is it? It's
no way.
Emotion, the whole you carry the whole emotion and character, as you say, in your whole entire body.
Exactly. For 3 hours
so
most of the time.
If you can't find that thing.
Yeah, if it's a moment in the music, if there's one arm you like to do, we'd say Portobello in ballet, but if there's one movement, one single step, or one something you can highlight that makes you fall in love with that solo, do it, because then you're going to get something more out of it. And I did. It worked for me. But in Sabbath, it was
what was the thing in Sabbath that you fell in love with that made you connect with it?
I think it really helped that my singing was started to be used.
Okay, so talk to me about that.
Yeah, let's segue into that.
It was supposed to be originally the whole chorus does some singing in the show, right?
Yeah. So this sort of there's two things going on here for me. I was promoted to principal dancer the week before our first workshop of Black Sabbath. There have been times in my career that and very recently, prior to that promotion, I was told I may never be a principal because of technicalities that I lacked. And that was a gut-wrenching moment.
Who told you this?
Certain coaches or...
Okay. So going back to those properly old school coaches, you'll never be a principal unless you follow my advice of I don't know what
and I'm being
advice-
very honest. I'm being very vulnerable sharing that.
Okay, I appreciate that, mate.
It was probably the hardest times of my career because it defined me wanting to be a principal dancer. It was what fed my passion. And then suddenly, where was I getting that fuel from? How was my fire going to burn if that was taken off the table? It was sort of accepting that, okay, this might be the ceiling of my career and I'm going to have to find ways to go sideways. I'm going to have to find other things to do with my passions and my interests that equally ignite the same feeling. Luckily for me, I obviously channeled that in a way that it started to show in my work, and that ceiling was lifted and I did get promoted, and it was the most incredible day of my career. I still can't believe that it's real. I still can't believe that I am where I am today. I still feel like an imposter as a principal. It's such a strange thing.
I don't think that ever stops.
It's something, I agree. And I think
because you're essentially, it only stops when you stop driving yourself to continue developing, evolving, trying new things. So I'm half saying I'm glad it hasn't stopped for you or me.
Yeah, it means it's like flipping the narrative, isn't it? It's imposter syndrome is because we feel a little uncomfortable, but feeling uncomfortable is when we grow, when we learn new skills. And how are you ever going to learn new skills if you're not thinking outside the box? And I think that's something that we have to embrace in some way.
And Sabbath really was that, wasn't it? Thinking outside the box.
Definitely. And that's why it worked. But
how did we get from, great, Lachlan's an incredible dancer, but no one's connecting on this Sabbath thing, to, we've got to put some singing into this as well.
Yeah.
And then actually, Lachlan's got a banging voice. Let's make him do a solo.
Yeah. So 4 days after being promoted to principal, and for me, being a principal is more than what I do on stage. It's who I am around the building. It's being someone that younger dancers couldn't look up to because it's what I did, and wanting to embrace various different facets of the career. It's also the work I do externally for the company. I think there's many things that come into what being a principal stands for. So here we were, 4 days after I'd been promoted to the rank I'd always dreamt of, thrust into our first workshop at Black Sabbath with the composer who was going to reorchestrate their music for the show. And he sat us all down, every dancer in the company, with sheet music and said, we're going to sing. And 95% of the room went, F off. We're not interested in that. We don't sing. And I think as dancers, it's a silent art form.
Yeah.
We don't use our voices. And a lot of people like it because we don't use our voices. It's quite a scary thing to do. It's a really vulnerable place to be, to put your voice out there, especially, for me, I had a passion for music and a passion for singing. But if someone does not, if English is a second language and they're there shouting, generals gathered in their masses, I think it's a really challenging thing to embrace.
Yeah.
You're really pushing people outside their comfort zone, but I think that's what they wanted to do. And I had been getting singing lessons ever since COVID, because COVID gave me downtime to think about other skills and gave me time as well. And I'd come back and I'd been getting regular singing lessons, had barely sung in front of anybody. And this composer said, would anyone like to sing this solo? Would anyone volunteer? And I thought, this is everything that my teacher's been preparing me for, because her approach was very much not perfect technical singing, but more the experience of what it feels like to be brave enough to sing. And I put my hand up and I said, I'm happy to do it, as my sort of 4 close friends around me just slowly drifted away from me out of embarrassment and social anxiety. And he said, great, let's have a go. So I sang this in front of people, dripping with sweat, probably shaking with fear, but internally going, A, this is what my singing teachers prepared me for, and I love this. And B, this is what being a principal stands for. I'm going to stand in this room and embrace every opportunity that's being thrown my way, and not look like I'm going to pick and choose what the work is, because it isn't. I'm not really paid to have an opinion on what we're doing. I'm paid to deliver the work. And I know that sounds really brutal, but that's the hard facts of it. So I sang this solo, and the composer came over to me and said, we need to use your voice in the show somehow. As it escalated, the entire company does sing, which is a powerful, powerful moment on opening night. We started shouting War Pigs at the audience, and they were in cheers, absolutely blown away.
It gave me I wasn't even there, and it's giving me a little tingle.
It was amazing. But as the show developed, 2 weeks before we opened it, one of the choreographers came over to me and she said, would you consider singing a solo mic'd up, because we've got a gap in this section and I just have no idea what to do with it. And I said, yeah, let's do it. Why not? Let's go for it. I would absolutely love that. And I had this sort of bubbling passion for wanting to do something with my voice. And at the same time, I was also starting to plan a solo cabaret back in Sydney with a teacher I get lessons from in Sydney when I'm home. This was all happening at the same time. So I thought, yeah, of course, what better way to build up some experience singing in front of an audience than in front of 2,500 people every night? Talk about deep end. And I said, yeah sure. So they wrote this little acoustic version of Black Sabbath, the song, and I would be taken away to another studio, sing it through a couple of times, and then I was thrown into we call it a full call, when the whole company come together and run a section of the piece, and I stood in the corner and sang it, drifted off shy into the corner afterwards, but everybody was so supportive. And the next week, I was standing on stage in front of Sharon Osbourne, singing this solo mic'd up. And I mean, it's only 2 minutes or something, but in the space of, from that week to 2-3 weeks later, I'd gone from singing in front of nobody to 30,000 people.
Which is absolutely insane.
I don't know where else I would have got that experience. I don't know.
Which is incredible, really. Yeah. And like you say, to perform something so out of the realms of conventional ballet, not that I know huge amounts about ballet, but a Black Sabbath ballet, and then going, right, my comfort zone is I've made it to principal dancer. Anyone else could rest on their laurels. You stuck your hand up and went, actually, I've got some other talents that I haven't been using here, which again leads me nicely on. I mean, because you play the piano, you have singing lessons, but you decided to do a one-man show back in Australia, in Sydney. I guess, can you just talk a little bit about the why behind it? I mean, I guess you've touched on it a little bit. You've been having singing lessons. You're exploring these other avenues creatively, but you're the male principal lead of Birmingham Royal Ballet, and yeah, you've had your chance to do a bit of singing on stage, admittedly in front of 20, 30,000 people or however many people it was over that period of time. But what was it? Was it, again, I want to challenge myself, I want to push myself out of those comfort zones, where you decided I'm going to create my own one-man show and put it on? Because presumably you did everything. You booked the venues, you're sourcing venues out with people back in Sydney. You're based here as well.
Yeah, well, I can't take all of that credit at all. And I say one-man show, but I had a fabulous accompanist who played for me. I didn't play for myself on the piano. And she's Lucy, my teacher and friend of mine back in Sydney. So every time I go home, I get some lessons from her. And what sort of emerged was that I just had this sort of songbook of stuff we were singing through. And it was like, let's get this out there. The only way to progress this and for me to get better is to throw it in front of an audience. And
talk to me, what sort of stuff are you singing? What's the set list look like?
Again, I like it to be a mixture of things. So I was singing a bit of Queen, a bit of Sinatra, a fair bit of musical theatre stuff, some Sondheim. I didn't actually sing any Sabbath, no. It didn't seem to fit right in a cabaret venue.
No, fair.
We tried. We did try. And I think it's interesting with cabaret because, you think feathers and high kicks and fun and glitzy glamour, really. And then I thought, that's not me. Like, what do I talk about? And you're sort of talking through this entire show, and in between singing, telling your life story or applying the songs to moments in your career that matter.
Is that how you played it?
Yeah. So I sort of talked back on my journey and applied different songs I was singing to each moment in my career. I called it music and the moments in between. No, I didn't. Cool. Moments and the music in between. So it was sort of, well, either way they work, that in between these big moments in my life, there was always music getting me through it. And that each of those have a very special place at a moment in my career or life. So I talked about moving to the Royal Ballet School. I talked about leaving my girlfriend behind then. I talked about the things that were sort of pivotal, emotional moments in my life.
And all of those moments were represented by a certain song?
By a song, yeah. Or made them work with a song anyway.
I'd love to see that set list.
It was...
And how it relates to the timeline.
It was really good fun. Really good fun. Always a bit of Hugh Jackman because he's a massive inspiration to me. And he started in musical theatre.
Yeah, of course.
And, I dabbled in the singing thing. I dabbled in auditioning for a musical in London about 7 years ago. American in Paris, when it came to London from Broadway. It's sort of a ballet cross musical in a way. So I'd auditioned for that, and I did get offered to understudy the lead role. So I was too young at the time, but there was this, again, somebody believing in me. And that's what Lucy, my friend at home who helped me organize the cabaret, she believed in me and she went, well, you can throw these songs in front of an audience. I trust you. I didn't trust myself at all. And the same thing in Sabbath throughout that process. They trusted me more than I trusted myself. So at the end of the day, I've learned in some ways when somebody believes in you on that level to lean into it, try to let go of the anxieties that I'm going to create because I'm going to have them. But I remember standing the opening night of Sabbath and I knew Sharon Osbourne was in the audience and I'm singing one of her husband's songs and I wasn't nervous one bit. I was so calm. It felt so right. And I trusted the process and I trusted the versatility and I love that. I love being able to display different things and exploring different elements of this career because it's going to be short. There's going to be another career post this that's probably going to be longer than this one.
How old are you now?
31.
31.
And you never know. You never know when it's, I'm struggling with a small injury at the moment. Is that a small injury of a couple of weeks? Is that something that's going to be there for the next 10 years? No, nobody knows. And
is there an average age for a dancer to retire? Presumably, I suppose it's when your body stops being able to do the things you need to do.
Yeah, and I think that's coupled with the psychological element of, do you like what your body can still do? Or can you continue to fall in love with what your body can still do? And constantly adjusting and adapting to stay relevant in the job, I think, because there's always going to be a 20-year-old who can do it better. But it's leaning into what the experience of having an over decade-long career brings, and that maybe it isn't as virtuosic as a young dancer with no injuries and no pains and a fresh level of energy, but it's actually everything that's layered on top of this life experience we're talking about and all those challenges and setbacks and what they bring, so that when you're on stage for 3 hours, you see all of that. You see the work, you see the graft, and you see the years of experience, and it matters. It has more weight.
What was the biggest difference for you performing on stage in a one-man show singing compared to doing the biggest solo in, the biggest ballet of the year, say? I'm going to hasten to guess that the singing felt more vulnerable because just through years of dancing, you've built up that, I know I can do this. The step 3/4 into the show might be a little tricky, but I know I can do it. Again, the imposter syndrome of throwing yourself out of your comfort zone. But I think I'm asking, what's the feeling like, say, compared to the exhilaration of doing the contemporary show dancing Black Sabbath to a one-man show that's about you, about your life, about these poignant moments? That's a lot more personal.
It is a lot more personal. Yeah, obviously in some ways that was scarier, much more nerve-wracking. And yet in between, I was able to speak about things or explain why I made certain choices. And in some ways, it was my first venture into anything of that sort. I had a slightly similar, look at me comparing the two, but I had a slightly similar experience selling my tickets for that show and it sold out in a week. Similar to Sabbath, but I wasn't selling 2,500, I was selling 50. But it still blew my mind. I thought 50 people want to come and hear me sing, but I also knew it was the first time I was doing it. So if I was shit or it fell apart, then so what in some way that, it was a bit of an exploration. How's this going to go? Can I do this? And the first time, if I stand up there and hit a couple of good notes, maybe that's all people want to see. And I think people were pleasantly surprised. I've done another one since. The second one was much scarier because people knew what to expect. But I think the first one had an air of naivety to it.
The same show?
No, it was another cabaret, but different songs.
Yeah.
Same venue. Similar people coming, but more scary, I think. But performing a sort of difficult classical solo on stage in a ballet, again, it depends on the ballet. But sometimes I feel really vulnerable in that, I guess. But they're different in different ways. But I think using my voice is already more vulnerable. Singing in front of people is scary. I have a lot of respect for professional singers who use their voice. It's quite obvious when you hit a bung note. But I think as a dancer, we have an air of flexibility about the way we move that you can disguise some things.
Interesting.
Which is why I think we have so much to learn from other people. We can all collaborate in so many different ways and learn something because we're all afraid of something about what we do.
Yeah. And that's something else that you're doing more of now. And like you say, in the role of as principal, you feel like you probably should. You're doing more teaching and choreographing and giving back to younger dancers, right?
Yeah, little bits when I can. And I'm always conscious of being a professional dancer doesn't make you a good teacher. I think that very good teachers have done proper courses, and they're often not the dancers who became principal dancers and led shows. They're people who have well-grafted careers and have really intensely had a dive into what it means to teach a step intricately. I'm not saying I have that level of expertise, but I try to give back where I can, and certainly try to create new work, choreograph, where I can, or try and take an opportunity like that. I absolutely love it. It's creative. It applies to my love for music. And also it's a sort of dive into ideas I might have with particular dancers at any given moment. And I think the teaching is a beautiful way to inspire young people. It's a beautiful position to be in. I can drop into some workshops and just inspire. It's not my job to think, like I was saying earlier, it's not my job to put a ceiling on their careers or to say nothing's achievable. It's actually to say everything's achievable and to want them to continue dancing. So it's a beautiful position to be in when I do teach, because it's just a matter of being nice and giving them a positive experience.
Yeah. Which I think, like you say, is so important for people coming through.
Definitely.
Okay, I've already mentioned it before, Lachlan is the Renaissance man. So not only is he a world-class ballet dancer, a lovely guy, a choreographer, a singer, a cabaret performer, Lachlan ventured into my world and started taking photographs, didn't he? And they're fucking awesome. You photograph ballet dancers, and obviously you're embedded in it. We're behind the stage at the Birmingham Royal Ballet, but your photographs are beautiful and they've been exhibited as well, which is another a string to your creative bow. But where did that come from? And also, I suppose, you being a dancer, you can almost preempt the photograph in a way. Does that make sense? I'm not probably explaining that very well, but if you're photographing ballet and dance and you know the steps, you know, oh, there's going to be a leap in 3 seconds time because there's three steps between these positions and the leap. Now, as someone waiting to fire the shutter, that's
very helpful.
Very helpful. Yeah.
Very helpful. And yet, I don't really enjoy capturing ballet positions. So I take photos of ballet dancers, but I don't really like trying to capture their arabesque or their jeté or these sort of iconic moments that you'd see as an audience member. I don't enjoy that at all. And I think that comes from that we're too critical of ourselves in pictures. And I'm the worst. I hate photos of myself in an actual dancing position because, again, all the things that I was either told or that I've learned or told myself that I dislike about how I present. So you'd overanalyze your hand or your foot or your this or that. So I just don't really even try and do that.
That's interesting because that goes on to my next point, because I love those photographs, but actually my favorite photographs that I've seen of yours are those ones that no one gets the access to, the in-between moments, the in-between shows, the look on a dancer's face just as she's come off stage, that intimacy that obviously you are embedded in it so you can get. But those are the ones that I find, but then I'm a portrait photographer, so I find people interesting rather than necessarily the shape of, like you say, a arabesque. I don't even know whether I said that right.
We need to make an arabesque.
Yeah. We can edit that in. Does that make sense? Is that something that interests you when you got your camera in front of you? You're more interested in those little moments that people don't see?
Definitely. Just going back a little to your question about the sort of journey here with photography. At the very beginning, I mentioned that as a kid, I was always the one on holiday with the camera. Thousands of photos, ridiculous things, you should have deleted 2,000 of them, but always that kid. And then we went on tour to Japan one year, and it was just a blast of another culture that I absolutely loved. It was vibrant and different. And I remember buying one of my first cameras there, and first, I guess, proper camera in quotations, and diving into the sort of world there. And then I started to take my camera backstage, firstly, as a way to capture friends when they did a big role for the first time. I would just try and capture them doing their bow or something, and then I would gift it to them as a print, as their sort of a memento or a memory.
A warm guy. You're a nice guy.
That's how it started. And then I found while I was backstage, I started to see other moments that could be captured. And sometimes it could be a tricky thing with permissions being backstage and not being in the way and your camera being a bit loud or things like that. And I certainly don't have a sort of flash bang amazing camera, but it's I don't think it matters. I think that it's more about what you see and how you try and capture it. And then I can remember the moment, and this is why you'll get this as a portrait photographer because your stuff's brilliant. I took a photo of a guy with his eyes closed in the wing, and he was preparing for one of the most difficult roles a man can do, and in The Sleeping Beauty. And I could see him psyching up and prepping up and catching his breath. And I could talk about this photo for much longer than any other I'd taken. And I thought, I've got to do a bit more of this. I've got to find moments like that backstage. Because I think there's a lot of trying to capture the ballet pose. But I don't really like that. I'll do it, but it doesn't fuel me. It doesn't excite me. I'd rather capture the dancer sitting on the floor doing a weird stretch, or in the wing looking bored as shit, or, in the dressing room with no makeup on looking exhausted, or...
I think it's that thing about connecting, like you said earlier, about you've got to connect with a piece, you've got to find that thing that you love in it. But you will always look at that knowing exactly the moment. It's up to once you've taken that picture, it's up to the viewer to make their story about it or whatever that might be.
And that's a powerful piece of art, you hope.
Exactly. But just you knowing that and the emotion, again, it's emotion and finding those moments.
Yeah. And as this progressed and I did my first solo exhibition at the RBSA in the jewelry quarter, I actually started to title a lot of my photos the dancer's first name. I said their real first name, but not the character or not who they were playing. Because for me, behind the makeup and the costume and everything, they were still just the dancer I knew. And there's often quiet moments I catch people and I can see the entire scene that's going on stage. I'm usually in a costume myself, covered in glitter and nutcracker, or in a massive Jack-in-the-Box costume with a camera in hand. But the more I'm around and the more I immerse myself in that space, the more people stop seeing me there. They stop realizing I've got a camera, because for the first day, they'll always be conscious of how they look, which I don't want. I'd rather it be a bit ugly or a bit gritty or a bit dirty. And because the career is a bit like that, there are really ordinary moments, like in any career, and the performance is glitzy, but the other stuff can be really hard work, or sometimes boring, or sometimes we don't like it, or sometimes it's just hard and people are tired. I've just entered a piece into an exhibition at the RBSA again, and it's a picture of several ballerinas in tutus preparing to do Swan Lake, and one of them's stretching, the other's yawning, and another one's got her face in her palms because she's so tired. And because the thought of having to do another half an hour on stage is just exhausting. And yet the curtain opens and they have to do their thing. And they have to look like 20 identical swans.
Well, I've told you this before, but I think it would make a fantastic book.
Thanks.
Generally, because I think it's the world that a ballet lover would never see. And I know there's other photographers that have been behind scenes with ballet dancers, but I think, like you say, there's a level of intimacy that comes with you being embedded in this company, embedded with the people, not to be rude, but you're part of the fixtures and fittings. So you there, whether you've got a camera or not, people are comfortable with it. And you can see that in the pictures, because you do get those bits that are so emotional and you're like, wow, if Lachlan wasn't in this and I came to do a project here, I'd never get that. I know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Unless I was very meticulous in how I embedded myself, or how I shot the project, maybe slightly longer lenses or whatever that might be.
Yes.
But does that make sense?
It does. And I think I was going to put it in a way that I feel very grateful that I have this is what I'm exposed to. I know these people inside out. I know the production's inside out. I know where not to be in the way at any given time. So I just sort of hang around and wait for a moment to appear, I guess. And I've been lucky to have that as access. And I think that's helped me develop my style in photography. And I do a bit of street photography. And when I travel, I take lots of photos, but nothing's caught on in the same way as sort of this backstage portraiture. And I think it's because this is my second home. Being backstage in the dark is my second home. And I know what people are going through.
And have you got any ambition to do more with that? I mean, presumably you have by entering in exhibitions, but I mean, as I say, you've got a lot. Like, you're spinning a lot of plates by the sound of it, as well as being the world-class dancer that you are, dipping your toes into all these other areas. But is that something to do with the fact that you are conscious of you're 31, the career as a principal won't last forever because your body won't. But what are your thoughts about future after dance? Is it incorporating all of these elements? Is it choreography?
It's a really interesting question. What I've been lucky, I say that a lot, don't I? But I do believe it. I'm not just throwing it out there. I feel as though I've been able to explore so many different things while maintaining a full-time job that has become my most successful career. So alongside that as stability, I've been able to explore other stuff. And I'm not sure everybody has that luxury. I do feel incredibly lucky for that. And the position I'm at as principal here, I still am able to do that. Like we've touched on all the different things that I get to do. And I think they further enrich my job as a dancer. I always come back from those things and those projects having learned something that I can apply now or will hopefully apply one day to what I already do. What would I want to do? Yeah, I mean, I'd like to create a bit more dance work. I'd like to choreograph more. I'm looking at getting into a project with a friend of mine to create dance films. So that's a sort of merge of photography, a bit of videography, and seeing how we can present dance in a film context. And people already do this, but just to merge my interest in choreography as well. In terms of strict photography, I do it when I can, as much as I can. Some productions are more pleasing to a camera. Others don't interest me or don't ignite my passion. And I'm in that position where I can pick and choose what does.
Would you consider a book or something like that in the future?
Yeah, I think I would. I sort of go back through a catalogue of stuff sometimes and find other things or other moments that I may not have even realised was something I liked when I took it.
Well, so, you view something with different eyes every time you see it, don't you? So.
Absolutely. And also the reason I'm involved with the RBSA quite heavily is because I'm one of two photographers, the first in history to ever be associate members of the gallery, I think in 250 years or something. So there's a change in culture with photography where I think it's becoming more accepted in certain galleries as a form of art. So I think that's a really nice progression. I do as much as I can when I can, but I think my true passion for moving forward is to be a director of a ballet company. I think that's what is sitting highest for me at the moment. And it is almost a culmination of all those skills.
Well, I think I agree, especially the way, like you said, how more contemporary ballets are becoming more popular. The idea of the choreographer doing the Black Sabbath and reorchestrating the music and things like that. I think that could be a very interesting. I would definitely come to see performances at your company because I think they'd be so diverse and so interesting because of your skill sets that you've mastered over the years.
I really appreciate that. I also think I really care about people. I really care that they feel valued because I have a short list of people who really believed in me. And that's when I delivered my best. That's when I felt comfortable enough to be brave. That's an interesting sentence, isn't it? But
I mean, it's not made easy for people. You're in a creative industry, I'm in a creative industry, and we've worked enough that we can have, like we say, our quote unquote full-time jobs, my photography career, your dancing. But yeah, that diversity is important, and having the courage to believe in yourself enough to be able to do it. And I think, and also I've said this in other podcasts, we never really know quite who we inspire on our journey. And especially for someone like you who has reached such high levels of not just the dancing, world-class ballet dancer, but not many people who've had their own one-man show, performed twice, photography exhibitions, associate members, this, that, and the other, and dipped into all of that. I'm teetering around the idea of this podcast being called The Renaissance Man. I was looking for some really clever dance, ballet-related thing, but you really are like that creative, I don't even know what the right word is, in creative polymath that's got, like me in some respects, lots of strings to the bow, but yours seem to be a bit more tangible and cool, dare I say.
I definitely don't feel like they're cool, but I appreciate that very much. I just love it. I like to give anything a go that I love. I've enjoyed that very much. It's what keeps me going.
But that takes bravery. Looking back in hindsight, do you think that bravery and resilience is simply, like we've said, you combat imposter syndrome by giving yourself irrefutable evidence that you can fucking do the thing? So you just have to almost say yes, do it, and then go, well, I did this, so I can probably do that.
Yes. I think we're often taught, find your boundaries and learn to say no. And yet I was also taught, say yes to everything and learn how after. And, are you ready to go on for that role? Yes. Can I just have an hour and a half rehearsal? You know what I mean? It's finding a balance that means you get to give that thing a go. Don't say no. Don't pull away from anything that could actually end up changing your narrative so deeply that it makes impacting change on your career. And I've had that a lot. I've had just say yes, give it a go. But you have to create the space for people to want to say yes or to feel comfortable enough to say yes. And I think that's how I'd like to give back. I think it isn't strictly through teaching, but hopefully through leading people, creating a space, creating a company where they can deliver their best.
But that's kind of what I feel about with things like the podcast. It's like,
I'm sure.
And we've said it before, and when we sat down before this podcast, is, your talent plus helping people equals your purpose. Whether I like it or not, I've got a talent for creativity, so have you. And giving back in some way to show other people that, look, you can do it. And again, we all combat imposter syndrome, but I think we're so quick to shut down people's dreams, shut down people's ideas. And a lot of the time, I only worry that that's because it's a reflection of perhaps we're turning a mirror on the person we're telling. Because you go, I want to start a podcast. And I had pushback. Oh, why do you want to do that? You're a photographer.
Yeah.
Well, so?
Why not?
Well, yeah, why not? Why not?
Well,
why do I want to get to the end of my life and go, I only did this?
Yeah.
And I'm already in a lucky position like you are that we do something that is out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
We're not going to an office 9 to 5 or spreadsheets or whatever that is. And we are very lucky and we appreciate that. We've had to sacrifice to get that. People don't see the 20 years of me being self-employed where you literally have no idea what is coming in from month to month, or you sprain your ankle and you're off.
Yeah, exactly.
Off work for a year and you haven't danced. You might be being paid, but you still haven't danced. And then there's the competition elements that come in and someone's going to take my place. And
I think it's constant resilience. But life is that, isn't it? And I think there's so many avenues now to pursue the things you love. And in some ways, arguably, it's harder to become as successful in them because a lot more people are giving it a go. But equally, there's so many avenues to pursue and ways to consider doing the things you love. Even if it is alongside something that you have to hold as a stable career, I think there are so many options just by saying yes or just giving it a go, diving in, jumping off the cliff and just, building your wings on the way down. That's what they say, hey? Like, just find your flow later and just, if you have a passion for something, give it a go.
Experiment, play, dip your toes into all different things, and that's how you learn.
Definitely.
Dude, this has been very interesting. I think we've covered quite a lot of stuff here. Is there anything you feel I should have asked that I haven't? What have we missed in your journey?
I don't think there's anything. I think it's,
which is great. If
we could talk all evening.
But
hey,
I think you and I definitely could probably talk all evening, but I just wondered if there's anything that I've done my research, but there might be something really obvious that I've missed that you feel like is a key element to the story, maybe?
I don't think so. I think this is
that means I'm obviously a fantastic
obviously absolutely amazing, which you are.
Thank you. Again, I'm learning to take compliments. It's very difficult.
It's hard to do.
Especially in this because it's so new. I don't know how to interview people. I'm just winging it and hoping that we're having a conversation and there'll be some interesting stuff in it.
Yeah.
And off the back of that, traditional little ending to the Creative Noelan podcast that I like to do. I like to leave people with 1, an inspiring quote.
Yep.
And then 2, a suggestion of someone in your network that you think would be an interesting person to come and be a guest on the podcast. So, over to you. Should we start with the quote?
Well, it isn't really a quote, but it sort of piggybacks on some of the things we've spoken about, and always be brave. I try to always be brave and not be afraid to explore anything. I think it's always trying to show, in being brave, I think you're ultimately saying to yourself, you're trying to be your truest self rather than trying to be what others might expect you to be. I think that's the scariest thing a lot of us find. Being your most authentic self you're going to deliver a better result. And I think that's what I try to apply to everything I do. And I always try and tell dancers, be brave, don't hold back, go beyond, always push too far. You can always come back. It's easier to come back than go forward. So always push a little too far.
That's pretty great advice, I think. Not easy to do sometimes in practicality, but it's...
No.
But then that's what we want. An inspiring quote shouldn't be just like, oh, sweet, I'll just implement that and get on with it, because then it wouldn't be the inspiring quote, would it? It's like, there's got to be a little bit of resistance to that. Because being brave, you have to be presented with an opportunity where you can be brave. And then that's where you have to ask the question, how do I be brave now?
Yeah,
that's great advice.
Alongside that, when that opportunity is presented, sort of part B, I guess, is not to be afraid to be bad at something. Because you're going to be. The first few times, the majority of people don't pick up a skill or a hobby the first time. It takes practice, takes years. And the first couple of times are going to be crap. It's going to be hard. You're going to want to give up. And in some ways, I learned a lot of these skills when I was younger. And when we're younger, we have a little more patience and a little more tolerance for being bad, because
you've got more plasticity. The punches roll off sometimes a little bit more
pretty
when
much.
You're an adult.
Yeah, and when you're learning simple scales on the piano and you're 15, it's a little easier than picking it up later, but it doesn't really matter. Don't be afraid to be bad at something the first time. And sometimes the worst that happens is that we're just not good. And that's not that bad.
No, it's really not. We don't have to be good at everything, but if we try them, we can understand it.
And we're only going to get better by having tried it and learned something. We're going to walk away with some lesson. So there's sort of two halves to that,
and fits in with the ethos of what I'm trying to do with Creative Noahland. It's like, you can sit there talking about your dreams and your goals, but you've got to give it a go at some point. You've got to be brave. You've got to say yes at some point to taking those opportunities to prove your bravery, because that's what it is. It's not that you're not scared. It's doing it in the face of being scared, and that's courage, isn't it, essentially?
It exactly is, and it's similar to what we spoke about me trying to maintain a perspective over ballet. It's a perspective, isn't it? It's that the world will continue to spin, whether you fail at that thing or not. So try it. What's the worst that can happen?
Perfect. And go on then. Who is someone in your network that you think would be an interesting guest to come and talk to us on the Creative Noahland podcast?
I think that Becky Downey, Olympic gymnast on Team GB, would be an amazing guest to have. I worked with her over the last 3 or 4 years on and off. She reached out amazingly because she needed some coaching for spins on her floor routine. And I went along, helped her develop some new skills that she could apply to what she already knew, which was outstanding. Amazing way of me learning how to teach in a different way than using ballet terminology. And she was so open to anything that it sort of transpired that over the last couple of years, I've worked with her and created some choreography for floor routines or beam routines even. And she's the most resilient athlete person I think I've ever met, and the hardest worker. There's something that was so incredible about watching her work, walking into her space, the amount of self-practice and alone time that she had to spend perfecting her bar routine or floor routine was inspiring. So I think she's an amazing person, and she's been through a lot of really difficult times to get to where she got, and just competed in her last Olympics of her career. So I think she'd be an amazing guest.
Wow, she does. That sounds absolutely amazing. And let's hope that she agrees to coming on. Dude, I think we have ticked a lot of boxes there. And I think there's going to be a lot of people inspired by your story of fighting conventional barriers, overcoming hurdles, especially as a male in a dance world and all those things, and to reach, I'm going to say again, the elite world-class level that you've reached, but to still find the time to balance all these other creative aspects is kind of a bit mind-blowing to me. But dude, thank you again so much for taking the time.
I really appreciate it.
It's been a year in the making, but we've probably got to let you go back to some 3-hour dance rehearsal now or something now.
Yeah, I better go point my toes or something.
Oh, yeah. Go on. I was trying to get away without doing some Australian stereotype, or B, some ballet stereotype.
And I went straight in.
Yeah. Sweet. Thanks, dude. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you for listening to the Creative Noahland podcast. If you found anything inspiring or useful in this episode, please consider subscribing or maybe sharing the episode with a friend. Anything you can do to help promote and support Creative Noahland is so beneficial, and I really appreciate it. Check out the website and sign up to the newsletter to be the first to know of everything that's going on here in Creative Noahland. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, explore, inspire and create.
Better to have a short life that is full of what you like doing than a long life spent in a miserable way. And so, therefore, it's so important to consider this question: what do I desire?